Did you get an error, catch bear, shoot bear? What do you do?
And catch.
And a catch one.
That's a bad
Shoot one?
That's bigger than one that makes a shot. This was, they had these 42 inches. This was 42 and a quarter. Right.
Okay, it's 5:45, let's call the meeting to order. Jenny, roll call please.
Amy Riddle Swanson.
Here.
Tanya Huseby. Here. Charlie Schneider.
Here.
Mark Hillman.
Here.
Angie Skillings. Carl Palmer. Abe Smith.
Here.
Dominique Stewart. Here. Rachel Henderson.
Here.
Okay, so we have a quorum, let's do the pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So just a reminder on our mission statement, the school district of the Menomonie area, by embracing the unique needs and using the strengths of our diverse community, is dedicated to preparing all students to become lifelong learners, caring individuals, and responsible citizens. Anybody have any requested changes to the agenda? Nothing? All right. Recommendations and accommodations. We have a bunch. So let's start with retiring staff members. Okay. For the staff members that are here, if you would come up, please. Sheila Story, 19 years of service. Jay Stanley, 28 years of service. Marianne Hitz, 21 years of service. Carol Ropella, 29 years of service. Tim Miller, 27 years of service. Michelle Gibson, 29 years of service. And Pat Bundy, 21 years of service. Come on up, please. Yes, I am. Thank you both for your many years of service. Appreciate it. I wasn't doing the math there, but that was a lot of years of service. And one more, Jane Reddig. Come on up. This is a accommodation for her work with Spanish-speaking families who need an interpreter and advocacy services. Jane goes all of her way to assist this group of folks. Here you are. Thank you. You wanted to say a few
I wanted
words?
to say a few words if I could.
Mike, just, there we go, right here.
Well, I can talk pretty well. Right? I don't know who I talk to. But I just wanted to thank you for this. It's been a very positive and rewarding experience for me to work with the students and the parents and the teachers and the staff. And I believe it's really important to give back to the community, and when you have skills and time that you can do that, that's important to do. The kids are learning content while they're learning a language. And anyone who's lived in another country knows that that is a real challenge. And so the parents, the kids really need this support. And I'd really like to make a big applaud to the teachers and the staff I've worked with too. They are absolutely amazing. Besides the obvious skills they bring to teaching, they go above and beyond with these kids and to really help them to be responsible, hopefully in the future, contributing members of our community. And so I just can't say enough about the good and the commitment they give to those kids. So but thank you all, and thank you for your services.
Thank you. Okay, and moving on to community communications, we have two this evening. First is Suzette Neiman. Come on up, please state your address, and remember you'll be limited to 3 minutes.
My name is Suzette Neiman, and I live at 3014 Wilson Street. Many Americans over the course of history of the USA have been racist and have caused grave injustices against the African Americans, Native Americans, Latinos, and Asian Americans. And even today, there remain Americans who are racist. A very unacceptable reaction has ensued in which all white Americans are claimed to be racist and our country is declared to be racist. And this philosophy has become embodied in what is known as critical race theory, or CRT, which encourages people to see themselves as victims instead of people responsible for their own success and actions. All should be encouraged to believe that they are capable of anything they desire to achieve instead of being encouraged to believe that they have no future due to the institutionalized racism. Martin Luther King Jr. called for a world where humans would be judged based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And the liberal apologists wrongly accuse immoral action by the criminals as a result of their oppression against people of color, and thus call for judging people based on the color of their skin instead of the content of their character. Racism is all of it, in all of its forms, is wrong. CRT uses bigotry of race to divide groups and to assault the character of conservative African Americans like Barrington Martin II. CRT requires teachers to educate children through a lens of race, causing children to see themselves as either a victim or an oppressor. CRT is a tool for proponents of cultural Marxism and denies the concept of individual liberty, equality, and freedom, which has made the USA such a wonderful place for advancement for millions of immigrants, which is proven by the fact that even today, huge numbers of people are trying to immigrate to the USA. Liberal lawmakers, teachers, union representatives, school boards, and school superintendents deny the existence of CRT and have declared parents who are concerned about CRT to be domestic terrorists and have claimed that parents should not have roles in their children's education. Educators should teach that the United States of America is an exceptional nation whose people have always strived to form a more perfect union based upon our founding principles that our founding fathers, including George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, and Reverend Martin Luther King, were among the greatest American stories ever lived, and they deserve to be honored.
Thank you, Ms. Neiman. Scott Parker.
So with policy 163.1 up for debate and being revised, I'd like to talk about the National School Board Association again. So after the letter came out, they had a third-party lawyer firm do an investigation to see how it happened. That report came out on Friday. I would recommend that everybody reads it. It's about 53 pages. It's kind of rough to get through, but some of the findings are as follows. So Well, first, the last meeting, we talked about Chip Slavin being the former CEO and having stepped down, and it seeming like that the NSBA had turned a corner and wasn't gonna do this sort of thing again, and after reading that report, I would disagree. So Chip Slavin, the former CEO, through Jane Mello, the interim chief advocacy officer, had Deborah Rigsby, the program director, lobbying and federal legislation, start drafting the letter. Over the next several weeks, while drafting the letter, Slavin had Mello ask senior research analyst Jin Hong Kai, quote, pull together some instances of threatening meetings from the media. I'll get back to those if there's time at the end of my talk here. So in mid-September, Slavin and Garcia, who's the president of the school board at the time, approved a proposal for a joint statement between the School Superintendents Association, the ASA, and the NSBA. During the drafting process, it became clear that the ASA and the NSBA disagreed on the appropriate response from the federal government. At one point, the ASA said they did not want to call for federal intervention as it considered such intervention to be, quote, a recipe for disaster and not at all a role for the federal government in school board meetings, end quote. So that was mid-September. On September 24th, the letter was shared per Mr. Slavin's direction with Francis Negron, the chief legal officer, Renee Joe, the chief transformation officer at the time, Joe Amos, the communications director, Elena Kukanova Carpenter, the interim chief financial officer. All those executives had access to this letter prior to it being released. 2 days later, it was shared with all board of director officers, which includes the immediate past president at the time, Charlie Wilson, the president at the time, Viola Garcia, Frank Henderson, the current president, who was the president-elect at the time, and Christy Sweat, who's the president-elect now, and the former secretary-treasurer at the time. They all expressed approval, with one exception, Viola Garcia. She wanted one edit to be made to the letter. This is the last page of that letter. She wanted her name on the letter as a signatory. So, to say that they've turned a corner would be incorrect in my opinion. Saying that Chip Slavin resigning would be a step in the right direction, when I would say that Chip Slavin stepping down is essentially him being a scapegoat for this entire fiasco. And he's the only person being punished. All the other people that I listed remain in their position. The former president, Garcia, is now the Federal Education Advisory Board on that.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, and we received one more from Ms. Pillman. You all have had access to that. It is in board docs. From my point of view, I would like to suggest that we have it entered into the record, as we have been the last few months with messages that are sent to us rather than people that are here. Does anybody have any objection to that? Okay. Then we will move on to the personnel consent agenda. We look for a motion to approve that.
So moved, Jason.
And Mark, second. Motion by Abe, Mark, seconded by Mark. Any questions, thoughts, questions, comments? No? All right. No discussion? All right, take a vote. So the motion passes 7-0. Moving on to the action agenda. First item on the action agenda is to approve the movement into the master's lane for teachers with national board certification. We talked about this at the last meeting. Entertain a motion for that.
I'll to wait. No. So.
Motion by Rachel, second.
I'll second.
And the second by Mark. Discussion? Amy?
I wasn't here last time when you discussed. I was not here at the last board meeting when you discussed this. And so I had some questions, about it. First of all, what happens to the teachers that are already national board certified?
The national board certified teachers would be allowed to move in the master's lane just like anybody else.
That are already certified?
Yes.
In other words, that have already have the certification.
Yes, if someone is certified, they'd be allowed to move in the master's lane.
Okay, that's one question I had. And then, my other question is, it says something about, if they miss out and they don't do their, national board certification, they go backwards on the pay scale. And I have a little bit of a concern about that because, I worry about teachers that, have medical issues or have issues that prevents them from actually being able to complete that national board certification. I don't know if we need to take those case by case, but to me, that's a huge concern for some of these teachers that might want to keep up their national board certification. Obviously, everybody wants more money, so.
Is there a question or?
Well, just a concern, and you can answer it if you want.
Yeah, I mean, the way it's presented is that someone would need to maintain their certification to continue to receive the incentive. Not receiving the certification would not mean that they would lose their job, but they would no longer be compensated at that higher rate.
Thank you.
I also have some comments and concerns to raise. First, I was able to do some more research in the national board certification and hear from some teachers about their thoughts about it and some concerns they have raised, which I had not thought about and had not heard about at our last meeting. So for one, I think that I agree with Amy that it is a little, having to take a pay cut from being in the master's lane to not being in the master's lane because of unforeseen circumstances, or things like family changes, like we have a large population of our teaching staff, could potentially have family or have other circumstances that come up that would prevent them from continuing to recertify. So that's a big jump back into the other lane, which is a concern. I also think that the national board certification is really good for teachers to build on the experience they have. So it's not really something that is designed for a earlier teacher. It's for a veteran. So it really doesn't solve the issue of a master's being inaccessible to early teachers, which I think was sort of brought up, and it's something that I had thought about, but I had taught for like 5 years before starting to think about it. Another concern, if teachers, I think what we want to do is empower teachers to continue their education, continue their professional development. And I think rather than having people get their masters and then not have an incentive to get national board certified, or the opposite, that we should look at a different model. So the Eau Claire School District and I think Chippewa, instead of doing like the lanes like we do, offer stipends. So that way all of our teachers that are sort of in the middle of our pay scale, that aren't being like bumped up because they're at the very bottom, they're like stuck in the middle. If they have their masters, we'll have more of an incentive to actually get national board certified as well. And so honestly, I think that is a better option than what we have, so I don't plan on voting to approve this.
I guess just a few comments. If the board doesn't want to do this, that's fine. We don't have this now. The administrative team, in talking with the principals and talking with a number of teachers, have been trying to find a way to provide more access for more teachers into the higher compensation. This is trying to give teachers more money. And if the board would rather not do that, that's fine. I think it's a good mechanism. I have talked to some teachers, including teachers that have national board certification. And one of our elementary teachers who has both a master's and a board certification commented on how powerful the board certification is and how it really encourages more lifelong learning than a master's degree does in many cases, because a lot of times the master's degree, you get it and then, you know, you're in the master's line and that's it. Which if that's what people prefer, that still is an option. This isn't saying we're doing this instead of a master's degree. This is just adding another opportunity for people to receive higher compensation. It should be pointed out too, and I know this is in the background, and you know, board members have had this for 2.5 weeks, and this is the first I've heard of any concerns along these lines. But teachers do receive stipends as well from the state, $2,500 a year, I believe, and then if you're in a high need school, which we do have some that qualify, that would be an additional $2,500. So to me, there's good opportunity here, but again, if the board would rather not go down this road, that's fine. We can go back to the drawing board and come up with a different idea for providing our teachers with more compensation.
I would also like to clarify as well, the reason that I didn't have concerns to bring up before was because there was not teacher concerns brought up before. They didn't hear until they were concerned about it being for us approving it today, and they brought it to me. So I really appreciate the communication that I did receive, and that is why I'm changing my position on it, because I heard directly from teachers that gave me perspectives that I hadn't thought of yet. So I'm not saying that I agree with you as well. Like, we want to find ways to give our teachers more money for the professional development they have. But I do think just putting it in the 2 lanes wouldn't encourage teachers to do both. I think it would. I think it would sort of line up into either or, and this way there's more incentive to do both.
Clarifying question, Dominique. When you said this way, there's more incentive to do both.
Yes, so I'm not saying that I wouldn't look into modifying this at some point to change it to a sort of stipend model. That would be something I think that would encourage people to do both, but as it is right now, I don't think it does.
And when you say both, you're speaking of the national board certification as well as a master's.
I guess the only thing I would add is that we have, one of the reasons why this proposal came forward was that the concern that we heard from our teachers about the cost of obtaining the master's degree, and how there may be teachers that want to do both. And if they want to, we certainly encourage that. But right now, the only way a teacher can be the highest paid teacher in the school district is by obtaining a master's degree. It's very expensive. This is a lot less expensive, and there's opportunity for additional reimbursement for the costs for some teachers through the state. So again, we felt like this was a good proposal, but whatever the board wants to do, we certainly will carry out.
So in terms of the, there are 2 issues raised between Amy and Dominique that I think are worth really kind of thinking about a bit. The first one is, I think the first one that Amy brought up, which is the for phase out. If so the recertification time is at 5 years. Do we know what's the window for that recertification? Is it a 1-year renewal process, or what's the time span? Which one, like, can one renew in year 3 of that 5 years, or?
Brian, do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, an individual can start the recertification process at any time during that 5-year window. However, they have start points that would make it possible in that last year if somebody wanted to, but they could spread it out over a longer window of time, should they choose to do so.
So I think that the question about, someone becomes ill, maybe goes on, maternity leave for many months, and this is a window of opportunity, and then has a serious pay hit because of that, and then has to scramble to get their life back, and we're both maybe overcoming an illness or some life change, and the change of pay. I wonder if that could be solved, at least largely addressed in the vast majority of cases by simply having a time delay, making sure that cutoff isn't too severe, have an extra buffer in the pay scale time window beyond when the certification expires, right? If the timelines allow, say, I can get this another 6 months after this window is closed. So that's one remark. On the remark about it sounds to me like one of the things that Dominic is concerned about is the implicit disincentive of getting a master's if one does NBCT. And so therefore, if you can get in the same pay grade in both, there is not any additional incentive in order to do both of them, for example, right? And you actually, you certainly hope to continuously incentivize people to do more development, more professional development, more certification as they can go. So I wonder if it would, and it sounds like you're describing Claire systems, they have maybe is it like a fixed additional income that comes from getting the certification or getting the master's on a per year basis?
I can't remember exactly, and I linked it in what I printed off, and then I didn't print off that link. Not helpful, right? In paper, it's not working. But I think maybe it was like, if you have your national board certification, you would get like a $2,000 stipend a year.
So I wonder if, it sounds to me like, you have people who maybe have no certification at all, they could get a master's, and you hope they'd also go for national board. Or you have someone who does not yet have a master's, has a national board, and then in a few years might think, I'd like to get a master's because I want to develop as a professional, but it's just not worth it, so I'm not going to be compensated for it. So it seems that I wonder if one way to proceed down that path is to look at approving this, and then then look again at, can we make either a compounding or multi-layer process later. So if we can get someone to take one of these two steps, that's great. And then we have to find a second way to give them a second step if they want to do both, or otherwise enhance their background. So I'm kind of wondering if we can put down a layer and then do it step by step in the future. So it sounds like that's maybe one of the main concerns is that disincentive for the second of the two options.
That seems to make some sense to me. We would be taking two steps. And I think what has been talked about tonight is taking two steps instead of one. I do think we would want to play that forward in terms of what the budget might look like. I think the board would want to know what kind of financial commitment is being committed to. Because right now, I don't see this as necessarily increasing the financial commitment. I think this is just a mechanism to provide teachers with more options. Right now, the only option is getting the master's degree, and it's very expensive to do so. I would be cautious, and I would not be in favor of some other grace period or buffer, or whatever we end up calling it. I mean, we have a lot of teachers in this district, and if our business office and HR office needs to keep track of everyone's certification, when it expires, and then some arbitrary buffer time, I could see some problems occurring with that. I really think the board would be better off just simply stating, if you're certified, you qualify. If you're not certified, you don't. Teachers are used to the certification process with their state certification. So teachers should be able to maintain certification if they know that it's coming due. And, the second step of that, if the board wants to consider an additional incentive in the future, again, I think knowing what the potential cost of that would be very important.
I have one more question, maybe for Brian. And I totally understand if you don't know, because I'm just throwing it at you. The other challenge with national board certification is that like with a master's, it's not like you're guaranteed to get it, but like if you do your work, you're gonna get it. And national board is, I think, maybe more subjective is the right word, it's a little bit trickier, but like, do you know if the recertification is as rigorous as what you do to get your initial certification?
I don't know the answer to that question, Dominique. You know, I know that there are a series of recertification steps that you have to go through to document your continued learning. But no, I don't know if the recertification is as rigorous as the initial exams that a staff member has to take.
Amy?
First of all, I'd like to ask, from what I understand, I'm not saying that you didn't talk to teachers, but I'm sure you did, but a lot of teachers have told me that they never heard anything about this or had any input on that, so that's one thing. And the other thing is, if a teacher gets a master's degree, they're there for life. I mean, you know, they have to keep doing it over and over, and I understand the expense, you know, and I understand that completely because I've done it. But it can be done, and I'm not trying to say that it's not expensive, but I just feel like if they were to go for their masters, to me, that would be a bigger incentive, at least for myself. You know, and I'm talking about myself here, I don't know about what other teachers would say, but for myself, getting a master's would be much more secure for me than having to always look at national board certification and have to keep it up to keep that place in the pay scale. Thank you.
I guess a couple comments on that. First of all, I'd be willing to bet that it's very possible that the cost of a master's degree now that our teachers have to get, the cost of that master's degree might be more than people's four-year degree and master's degree when we got master's degrees. That the cost has really increased. And in terms of talking to staff and sharing this with staff, staff receive updates after every single board meeting. And I'm looking at the update I sent out on May 10th. So not only was it in the minutes, but I also called it out on a separate item. And I just got done conducting listening sessions across every single building. I don't know that this topic was a primary conversation in each building, but in several of the buildings it was. So I don't know which teachers you talk to, but if you ever do have questions, I encourage you to reach out to me prior to the meeting so we can talk those through.
I guess I have one comment. If we were to approve this tonight, it wouldn't keep us from doing something like Dominique talked about in the future, first of all. And then secondly, if we decided that we wanted to go down that road, I guess to me, it just gives the teachers more options. I don't see where it takes anything away from anyone. They don't have to do this. They can go after their masters if they'd like. They don't have to, but they can go a different direction if they'd like. So it seems to me like a positive, not in my opinion, not a negative in that it gives them more options. Just my thoughts there. And I understand the possibility of having to go backwards should life intercede, let's say. But I think we can work on those. I would think and hope that those would be few and far between, and we could work with those on an individual basis if that happens. So just some thoughts. Any other discussion or thoughts, questions?
I really like the way you phrased that just now, Charlie. I think based on that and based on the conversation we had last time, I am inclined to support this with the kind of asterisks, right? Of like, there are some things that maybe this doesn't solve. One thing that Dominique mentioned that we didn't dig into much was the mid-career teachers. I've heard from folks that there's like, we want incentives for people that go into the district. We want incentives for people to, to recognize the people who have put in a lot of years. And then how are we making sure that mid-career teachers don't feel left out in that? And I think that's not solved by this necessarily, but that, you mentioned last time, Joe, that this isn't a silver bullet, but that this does give teachers another option. And there's other things that we we'll hopefully learn in the coming years or in the coming months, especially with the staff survey, that we could hopefully devise other plans for how we can address some of those other concerns.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I think that's a good point. Again, this is just an additional option. It's not something that anybody has to do. It's just making it easier to get into the master's lane if the teachers want to do that. In terms of the mid-career teachers, I will say that I think the board has done a really good job. When you look at the compensation increases for next year, the teachers are going to get not only the CPI, but also the steps. And that's something that the district hasn't done that I know of ever, and certainly not in the last 8 years. So the mid-career teachers, they're in the middle of the salary scale where the steps are the largest. At the very beginning of the scale, they're about a third, and at the end, they're about a third compared to what the teachers in the middle of the scale will receive in a step. So, but I agree, this is not meant to fix any retention issue in that avenue. This is meant to provide an additional option for teachers.
Amy?
Just one more thing. Back in Donna's age, when I got my master's degree, it paid off, and I don't know how it does now, but when I paid for my master's degree and then I got the incentive or the pay increase, I mean, it paid for itself in a couple of years. So I maybe it doesn't do that, but that's how it was when I got my master's.
Well, this will pay off that much quicker because the cost of national board certification is a fraction of the cost of a master's degree. So I agree. I still encourage teachers to get a master's degree if that's what they choose, especially if they have future aspirations of becoming an administrator or becoming a school counselor or some other position that requires a master's degree for upper level certification. So for some teachers, that still might be the best path. But for the teachers who don't want to take out more of a loan or who don't have the funds to go towards a master's degree, or they don't have the desire to go into a different certification, this is just another option that, and actually talking to some teachers, this might actually be more applicable to what they're doing in the classroom than taking some master's degree classes that may or may not be very applicable to what they're doing in their classrooms.
So, I apologize for Googling while listening, but I looked up the question we asked Brian previously. So there's basically a 2-year window in which you can reapply. So the example he gives, if your certificate were expiring in November 2022, one could have started the application process in September 2021. So it's over 2 academic years that you can extend. The extension process is pretty simple and extends from the later deadline, right? Not from when you submit the paperwork, but from when it would have expired. So you get that 5-year extension that way. And if the extension falls through or you miss it, you can, what they have you do is go back and redo the certification, the original certification. So you can get, well, you basically have to kind of go back and reapply in the original boot up system, right? But it does look to me like there's pretty good flexibility in the maintaining of the certificate. Yeah, and I hope, I think in terms of the pay structure question, as we're looking for the employee handbook, which is one of our agenda items tonight, the pay structure system is extremely complicated. And there are lots of incentives and disincentives in different categories of different boxes in that chart. And I think, we should continuously look at how to make it more encouraging and more consistent and more helpful to teachers. I think my dream would be that essentially every teacher would be kind of as certified as possible, and therefore be at the higher pay grade. And then also for those who want to go ahead and do a master's, to get them into that master's program and make sure they're also compensated for that, right? So that's my personal dream is to get the overall teaching population up the pay grade step by step, however we possibly can, whatever it takes to do that. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a great dream. I sure hope that that's something that schools are provided resources for, because I would love to see that as well. But the fact of the matter, and the board knows this, we're going to spend over $1.3 million more in salaries next year than what we're spending this year, based on the increases that the board approved. which I think is terrific. I think we need to compensate our staff well. I think we all want to do that. I think we all think that's important. But we also know that we received no new dollars from the state, no new spendable revenue this year and next year. We do have COVID money to get us through this year and next year, but there certainly is concern about the fiscal cliff facing us in the 23-24 school year with the new biennium starting. But I think that's a good thought, Abe.
Any other discussion? Okay, should we vote? Okay, roll call vote.
Rachel Henderson,
Yes.
Mark Hillman,
Yes.
Tanya Hughesby. Yes. Amy Riddle Swanson,
I'm gonna say yes, although I want us to be able to revisit this in the future and see if we can do anything different based on Abe's conversation, but Dominique has said it myself.
Charlie Schneider,
Yes.
Angie Skillings,
Yes.
Abe Smith.
Yes.
Dominique Stewart.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. Moving on to approving the transportation contract. Joe, you want to comment, or Mark? Yes, I do want a motion, thank you. We would entertain a motion.
I so move.
I'll second.
And Mark?
You can start.
Yeah, the board has been informed on this. I know the board discussed this last meeting. We certainly appreciate the work of Menomonie Transportation and all that they do to serve our school district. As the board knows, inflation has hit the transportation industry disproportionately compared to many other areas, although inflation's impacting just about everything right now. Some of the particulars that were discussed, certainly fuel, which a lot of that's built into the contract already to escalate as fuel goes up or down. But parts, buses, labor, all those things have increased exponentially for transportation services. So after a lot of discussions with Menomonie Transportation, with Mark serving as the chair for the board on this topic, the recommendation was to have a contract at 7.5% higher than this year. We appreciate Menomonie Transportation wanting to continue to work together, and that is what's recommended for tonight. Mark, anything to add?
No, other than the fact that I just want to thank Menomonie Transportation and the Howe family for their continued support and service to the school district. It's very encouraging to me that they chose to focus on a long-term relationship with us and take that contract. So my recommendation is for the school board to pass this because I think it's really good for both parties.
Any other questions or discussion? All right, nothing? Let's take a vote. Okay, the motion passes 8-0. Moving on to approving the bid for inventory and appraisal services. Entertain a motion to approve that.
Second.
Motion by Angie, second by Tanya. Any discussion?
In the board's packet, you can see policy, or some, sorry, not 681, requires appraisals every 5 years. I appreciate the work that Leah did in getting a proposal from Asset Control Solutions. They have been the company that has worked with the district for annual updates, and that is the bid that Leah is recommending.
Any questions, Dave?
I noticed, we sent out requests for several bids. Is it typical to only get one bid in return for this sort of work?
In the past, we've gotten 2 bids. I would say there's not a lot of companies out there that do this. I did search the state of Wisconsin bid contracts that they do, and I did not find any state contract for that type of service. So I think it's just kind of a unique service that not many companies provide.
And do you happen to know, this must have happened 5 years ago, is that right? 5 or 6 years ago. Do we know how much it's changed since then? What the bid from 2017?
Yep, the bid from Asset Control Solutions back then compared to this year is $3,500 more. And this bid is still at the 5-year total of $15,000 is still less than the other high bid that we received, which was just over $20,000. And that was, 5 years ago. So I do think this is a pretty good bid.
Thanks.
Any other questions, discussion? Okay, take a vote. Okay, motion passes 8-0. Moving on to the discussion portion of the agenda. First, we'll discuss student parent handbooks for the 2022-2023 school year. All of the current handbooks and the changes were in board docs for you to review. Anybody have any specific place where you want to start? I see Abe kind of teeing it up there.
It was a lot to read.
It was a lot to read. No questions, comments?
I guess I have an overall question about the process for revising. So do these revisions come primarily from principals? Do they do this in concert with staff? Is there parent input? How do the revisions happen?
Certainly, any of the principals here could also come up if you want to share anything, but I would say every level is slightly different, but similar in the fact that throughout the year, as the handbooks are used, typically the principals jot down notes of maybe things that might need more clarification or things that might need to be added based on changing times. Typically, whether it be through the building leadership team or the staff meeting, depending on the size of the staff, or through individual communications with teachers and other staff members. Again, that kind of builds into an inventory of things to consider. And then the principals work together with their teams. They draft up changes. I know at the elementary level, the elementary principals all work together on one consolidated elementary handbook. And then that's brought forward to the directors and myself to review with the board.
I had a question, I think primarily applies to the grade school handbook, but I think it was in the other ones as well. It's a lot to read, I did read it all. It was on the section on food payments. I was just wondering if it's possible to put in the food service section information about the Angel Fund or about how food debt is handled when debt accrues, right? And what parents' options are. I know that there are some statewide limitations on what we're allowed to say in terms of those things, but it seemed to me it said, it basically says, hey, we have this food program, and here's how to pay online. Here's a link to the wellness policy. Those are all great, but just kind of, how does one apply beyond just the prices for free and reduced and so on. So I think part of that was linked there, but it might be a little more clear if possible.
Great, I got to note it. We'll take a look at that when we meet tomorrow and see if any changes could be made. Thank you.
One point of discussion that we had last fall, I believe it was was about the wording for students and parents wishing to opt out of a specific course. Tanya, I remember you and I had some questions about that. Did you feel like the rewording was appropriate and sufficient, what was done?
Yeah, the ones we mapped out were really good. I'm skimming and scanning right now because I think it was only one level that wasn't.
Yeah, I think it was the high school handbook that was, the heading left it somewhat unclear, and I think that heading change that Mr. Drake made it much better.
Any other questions, comments?
One thing I would notice in all the handbooks is they have the information on how to learn about sudden closures to the weather. And I noticed they mentioned all the radio stations that you contact. I wonder if it's worth listing any social media that you use consistently. Maybe it's inconsistent, so it's not an official channel, but anything you consider an official channel. I think that fewer people listen to AM radio and more are on Twitter perhaps at this point, so.
What?
I think that's a good update. I certainly do tweet it out, and Facebook also now.
That also might call parents' attention to the newer Menomonie School Facebook page, which is new in the last year, right? So it might be worth mentioning that.
Under the same.
Or I don't know, yeah, under the same.
Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion, questions, thoughts, comments? All right, so we'll expect that to come back then at the next meeting. Okay, moving on to discussing the preliminary budget for 2022-2023. Again, lots of information there.
So again, I appreciate Leah's work, her team, but not just the business office, the building principals, our teachers, our staff, our custodians, director of building grounds. Everyone has a hand in developing the budget. And the timeline, which the board has seen a number of times, really begins in November. As soon as the current year budget is complete and the board approves it at the end of October, we're already starting to plan ahead for the next year. And this isn't the culmination, but it's getting close. This is the preliminary budget. The board will hopefully take action on the preliminary budget in June, which is then published for the annual meeting, which is held in August. And then that's how the school year begins operation. And then in October, according to state statute, once we have all the information, much of our budget is based on student enrollment, so we won't know that until the third Friday of September. Certainly the property tax valuation, which also comes in the early fall, that plays a role. Summer school enrollment plays a role in this. Now this is going into the second year of the biennium, so barring any unforeseen changes, we know what our state revenue limit is going to be, and we know what our ESSER funding is. So, Leah, is there anything that you wanted to point out specifically before we open it up for questions?
Well, I just wanted to mention that in the 22-23 budget estimate document, the assumptions at the top of that page, there's 9 listed there. I know there's a lot of information, a lot of documents. That's probably the best document you want to take a look at because that's where we list the revenue limit increases, the per pupil aid increase, all the various assumptions that we use to create this preliminary budget.
And with that being said, you can see the preliminary budget right now stands in a deficit of about $2.7 million. But we know that going in, and we knew that going in, that without any new revenue from the state, there would be a large deficit. The plan that we've had for a couple of years now is that the ESSER funding would be applied to handle the deficit. Now, there have been some unanticipated increases that impact this. The original budget estimate that we did back in February, we were thinking that transportation would be more similar to what our compensation increases would be like in previous years. Well, we didn't count on inflation rising as high as it did, so that has an impact. The compensation itself, typically, the steps would be included in the CPI. The board determined that it'd be better to pay the CPI and add the steps. That was like another $300,000. So we're gonna be cutting it pretty tight in terms of the ESSER funding, but we do think that we'll be able to bring this thing in by the time it's all said and done. But there are a lot of unknowns still at this point.
And to clarify that, you're referring to like the ninth, when we talk about the ESSER funding and being able to use that with respect to the deficit, that's where that ninth assumption that's listed in the budget estimate comes in. And that's the number of what's available in the balance of ESSER funding.
As of now, yes, but that's a moving target as well, Rachel. There's a lot of moving targets.
I understand, thank you.
Ian, can you remind me, what's the Fund 46? I know it's a capital project, but what one is that?
That's the capital project fund, the maintenance, we put maintenance in there, any other capital improvement items would go in there, technology, et cetera.
Is that the 30-year?
Yes.
Any other questions, thoughts? Okay. Yeah, we'll bring that back up next meeting as well. Moving on to reviewing the changes to the employee handbook for 2022-2023.
Our Director of Human Resources, Samantha White, wasn't able to be here tonight, but I appreciate her work in putting this together. Similar to the parent-student handbooks, throughout the year, Sam makes notes, things where additional clarification is needed. And you can see that there's not a lot of revisions at this point. But one thing I wanted to point out, let's see here, I'm just looking for the number, 1 second, so I can. So the fourth suggestion down in the changes, 5.01 teacher assignments, vacancies, and transfers. In one of the listening sessions, we heard from teachers that prior to Act 10 and in some of the old days of the collective bargaining agreement, teacher job shares were considered. And we do have some teachers, not many, but a couple teachers that had shared a position when they first, early in their career, when they were starting and had young families. And all these years later, some of these teachers who had a very positive experience at that time are starting to think about retirement and making comments to the fact that they may or may not be interested in teaching a full-time contract, but in the right job sharing situation, they may be interested in splitting a position. We've shied away a bit from that in the past because generally we feel it's best, especially at the elementary level, for a homeroom teacher to provide a consistent experience for students. But we do see some situations where we think that could work and be very effective depending on the team and the sharing arrangements that were made. So we would like to open that up, especially in a situation where there's such a teacher shortage across the nation. We think it's time to relook at this and perhaps offer a creative solution. So we are recommending that the board allow that. It still is at the discretion of the district because we would want to make sure it's the right team and the right situation for it to work. But in that situation where it could work, we think it could be beneficial. Other things are listed there, and certainly we can answer questions you might have.
I have a question about the first one, 902. What is the reasoning for not refunding those hours? Does that make sense?
Yes. So 9.02 is a situation when a teacher schedules a day off, paid leave off, and school may be released early or school may start a little bit late. In that situation, a sub is hired for that teacher if subs are available. And so one is we do have a subbing expense, and two is the bookwork on that is terrible. Trying to figure out and then refund hours and such. So if there is a scheduled day off, now if the whole day is canceled, that's a different story. But if we start an hour late or 2 hours late or leave, an hour and a half early, it becomes a real mess. So, this is clarifying the process.
Any other, Rachel?
I just had a question about the next one, the unpaid leave of absence, and I think maybe I'm misunderstanding the language, but if I am, maybe other people are too. When it says that employees would be required to pay the full premium of benefits when using 3 or more cumulative days, that means the full premium of benefits for the days that they're absent or for the entire year?
For the days that are absent,
Okay,
we could clarify that.
that feels, that makes much more sense.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly would not charge $25,000 for an
Do
unpaid
you
day.
see,
but yeah.
where like the language is just, I don't know.
I've got one more question. I'm traveling a little outside my realm of like expertise here because I'm talking about the coaches here. But in 109, there's I assume we're adding a distinction between head and assistant coaches having to use personal leave, and they haven't had to do that, and now assistant coaches will.
Correct.
Any other questions, thoughts? All right, we'll bring that one back as well. And now to reviewing the proposed revision to policy 163.1, school board memberships. Andy, you brought this up. Do you want to tee this one up for us?
It's been discussed a few times on the board, and it's my personal professional opinion that this membership is not and has not benefited us recently. It could be because of COVID, could be because of a lot of different issues, but I also didn't find the email correspondence that we got particularly beneficial. I don't feel like it applies to us here in rural western Wisconsin. A lot of emails pertain to what was going on in California or Pennsylvania or New York or things like that, and it didn't really seem beneficial to me. As noted in the attached document, I feel like we could do a lot of different things with that money that would be more beneficial. And I don't know, in the past, have we invited the student council president and vice president? Do they get to go to Wasb and attend the meetings and things like that?
I'm not aware of any time that a student has attended those.
Okay.
And I don't usually see students at those.
Okay.
Once in a while, if there's a student performance, they have student artwork that's displayed, or they have student musical performances. We'll see students for those. I would say also sometimes some of the schools that are more local to the area, close to where the convention is, where the student could go for a day trip or something like that. Or I guess now I'm thinking about it, I'm trying to think back all the times I've gone to the convention. Or if there's a presentation that involves students, which there aren't many typically, but that would be the other time when I would see students at the convention.
Yes.
They also have a team of students that will videotape some of the convention too and come up with their own, I guess, blog or, like whatever to share some of what was going on. So that's when students might be involved as well.
So that it's a good growth and development opportunity for budding, or,
I know that at one time, Jake Karkula had his jazz band try out an audition to be one of the, they have 3 performances for the 3 main keynotes before they come on. And, but he got denied, so, but I think that that would be something that I would like to see is to have us do that again.
So Angie, your recommendation would be on policy 163.1 to simply strike number 2?
Correct.
Any other discussion? Thoughts there? Dave?
I don't have any particularly deep thoughts, but I just want to point out that attached this morning was the independent review actually that Scott had mentioned, if you want a chance to look at it. So I can't say I read through all 54 pages of copied emails that were in there. And I agree that the situation was pretty disturbing. I do think that the bullet points, the sort of executive summary of the review is what I'd like to see an organization say, right? They said, that this does not reflect our values. We're making changes to make sure this sort of executive action doesn't happen again. Redefining the scope of their advocacy, right? I think, although I agree that the whole kind of, the whole debacle was both poorly managed and poorly handled. I actually see in this report that sign that the organization is reformulating itself. Now, that is distinct from the question of is it worth it, right? I think that's a really important question about do we want to spend these $4,000+ on membership? That is a tricky question. I currently lean in the direction of, yeah, I think so. I think I'd like to, I think there are nationwide issues in schools that really, we can really benefit from having connections with boards across the country. We mentioned last time the importance in the current, the importance in governance, in government in the United States of having voices as lobbyists and so on can be very helpful for school boards in general. I think, one issue in particular I think that's really helpful to get a nationwide perspective on is things like school safety, right? Issues that come up everywhere and with different nuance in different localities and different ways that different school districts have handled that, different states. I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. I agree that, Wasb is certainly much more important for us than this, but I think that this does have positive net value overall. But yeah, it's on the edge, I don't know.
I've been on the board, I'm not starting my 15th year, and I will say that in those 15 years, I have really enjoyed what the National School Board Association has done. Now, I don't agree with, what they said about terrorist parents and all of that, but I also see that people make mistakes a lot. And, if they're gonna try to revamp and fix it, I would like to stick with them, only because I've had the opportunity to go to several National School Board conventions, and they're great. And I'd like to, behoove the people that don't go to the professional developments like that, or to go to those kinds of things. They are really kind of cool to see, and I know that you said that it's not about here, Angie, but I can tell you right now, if you go to you're going to get to go to Wisconsin, because Association of School Boards Convention, because you're the delegate this year. So that hopefully will be really eye-opening for you as well. But when you talk to people from other people and other states and everything, you find out that you have some common threads. You also find out some really cool ideas, and I don't know, I just think it's just a real camaraderie thing. And I don't know if you saw Margaret Breisch's email today, but she sent an email and it talked about some of the benefits of what we get. Now, the one thing I have a question about is, last fall sometime, I quit getting the magazine and I quit getting the emails, which disappointed me. And I don't know if that's because Wasb sort of backed out and then sort of came back, or why that would be. But in my mind, I think it's an asset, and I think that we do have national coverage. I do respect your opinion, though, about how you feel about, the situation. But I also know that there's so much richness out there when you meet with other people and other programs. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Joe still can attend even if you're not a member, correct? As long as you're a school board member?
I believe you can. I think there's a higher cost if you're not a member, but I don't know the exact dollars.
Sure, but still an option to attend, one would desire.
I believe so, Tanya. I would have to look it up to be sure.
Would that mean that if we backed out, that we would have to pay our own way?
Seems like that'd be a school board decision.
Okay.
And by the way, I'm receiving their legal clips on a weekly basis, as well as
I do get
other
those.
documents from them. as well.
I do get those, but not the emails from the all the different news about school districts across the United States. I don't get that anymore,
I am getting them.
or the magazine, so I don't know.
This is a discussion item at this point, not an action item, so, I have maybe a suggestion for all of us as a board, so, to really, maybe in the next couple of weeks, log on to their website, really dig through the material and see if you find it worthwhile, right? It's actually like digging into the resources. I have not done that much because, I'm just onboarding still and trying to get in Wasb and trying to find all the different websites and everything. So really, look through that material and see what's available, and then we can kind of together decide as a board if we see it as a positive value or not. Maybe, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I think that's the all if we kind of dig in.
Makes sense to everyone as a chapter? So then we can bring it back at the next meeting and have discussion and vote at that point, if we want to. We wouldn't have to at that point either. All right, makes sense? Any other discussion there? All right. Discuss and review the WASB Annual Board Development Tool Survey. And if you click on that link that's on your page, it will take you to the tool if you'd like to look at it. So the discussion would be, do we want to use this as part of our development for our meeting on June 6th? So as a precursor to that, fill this out and look at the results to help inform us to where we want to go, what discussions we want to have at our board retreat or not.
And sorry, you said, has the board done this in the past prior to the retreats?
Yes.
And used the same tool?
Not necessarily connected to a retreat,
Oh,
right? But you've done it in the past.
Yeah, actually, this was the focus of a couple retreats, I believe, and there is some longitudinal data that's available. I don't know how helpful it would be with such the changeover we've had on the board, but nevertheless, I still think there'd be longitudinal data that could be reviewed and compared. But maybe more importantly, I think this could give the board an idea of areas of strength and also areas of perhaps attention that need to be focused on moving forward. I wonder a little bit with having 3 brand new board members, if you guys have gone through enough meetings to be able to answer some of the questions. But even if not, I still think that could provide longitudinal data for the future that could be useful.
And there is a not sure option on every question, it looks like, so if need be, we could just have, they'll know who the not sure are.
So what are your thoughts? If we did this, I guess I would like to see us do it sooner rather than later so that we can have the data back and be looking at it at that June 6th meeting to be used as part of the meeting rather than collecting it and looking at it that.
I think in the environment of a retreat, where we want to discuss kind of the culture and direction of the board and things like that, I think it's really useful to have something to focus on. And so whether this is the perfect tool or not is sort of irrelevant. It's that we can say, let's talk about item 3 and kind of discuss it. And so having something to point at and say, this is the topic we're actually discussing can be really helpful.
Agreed. So I'm not hearing any objections to that.
Charlie, one suggestion, if the board is going to do this, I would suggest the board get it done by the end of the long weekend so that school perceptions can turn it around almost immediately. But then John Ashley from Wasb, I think it would be helpful for him to see the results. So I would suggest prioritizing this week and trying to have it done by the end of May. I would say May 31st.
Do we get a code to fill it out, or is it already there?
That's in your
Okay.
Word docs.
Oh,
To make it easy, I guess I would suggest that we have it done 1 week from right now. So as you're getting ready to go back to work on Tuesday, get it done before Monday night. something to do over the Memorial holiday when it usually rains.
Is that something that we could, it might be helpful for someone to send a reminder to the full board on, beginning this weekend or something, with thinking of the weekend?
I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Maybe in your week report.
Oh, okay.
Okay, any other discussion necessary there? Nothing? All right, moving on to reviewing extracurricular staff contract requests. Report, is there any thoughts there, Joe, anything we need to pay particular attention to?
I don't believe so. This is a standard ongoing report for just board review.
Any discussion there? All right, hearing none. Moving on to items related to next meetings, so forth. Retirement mixer, what is that? The 25th is Wednesday at the middle school. Graduation next Sunday. June 6th is the board retreat, and then our regular meeting on the 13th. I won't go through the rest of them, but just a reminder of some upcoming dates. Remember, the board retreat is at 5:30, and the retirement mixer is at 4 at the middle school. Any questions there, thoughts?
Where is the board retreat?
Jake's.
I do have a quick question about the retirement mixer. Is that like a scheduled event or like just people show up whenever?
It's a scheduled event. There'll be a brief introduction right at 4 o'clock. Our school nutrition team usually has a nice spread of a light meal. And then we have a program where we introduce each retiree and talk about their career for a couple minutes.
Any other questions there?
Is that all the retirees that you mentioned tonight? Are they all included?
They're all invited. I do know there's at least one that's not, has indicated that they won't be there. But Jenny, how many are we expecting? Five we are expecting to be there.
Do we include parents that are retiring too?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a, 5-minute break? Then we'll move into closed session.